Hey, welcome to Wednesday at the Well, our midweek study of the book of Daniel, which we've been videotaping for the last 10 weeks. So thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to read from Daniel 11. We're in Daniel 11 now. The most detailed prophecies in the Bible. The most detailed. Remember that. Daniel 11 contained the most detailed prophecies in the Bible. And so I'm going to read from chapter 11, verse 2, 3, and 4, and then also verses 36, 37, 38, and 39. All right? And we'll just work through that. We're not going to do a verse by verse. That's going to be so hard. There's so many details here. There's 45 verses in this chapter, and there's so much to glean from it, or even to see and celebrate. But I want to point out a couple of things. Chapter 10 gives us the context by which we receive the visions or the prophecies in chapter 11 and 12. And so this is just a continuation of what Norm started last week. And I hope I do it some justice. Here are verses 2, 3, and 4. And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a fourth shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion, do as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom will be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides his posterity or his offspring. Then pick up at verse 36, okay? And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these. A God whom his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many, and shall divide the land for a price. I pray that the Lord gives us clarity above all else, that we would grow in our confidence that the word of God is true and is sure. And everything God has promised to us in his word will come to pass. All right? And so I just want to start. I'm going to go with, I'm really going to be more of like walking you through an overview of this chapter with some things that I gleaned from some commentaries, okay? There are 4 major sections in this chapter. Comfort and strengthening of Darius the Mede, Daniel 11, verse 1. Second is detailed information of the reign of the Hellenistic rulers who had influence over Israel, Daniel 11, 2 through 20. The rise of a vile person, and according to history, Antiochus Epiphanes, Daniel 11, 21 through 25. And a rise of a willful king, which I believe is the Antichrist, Daniel 11, 36 through 45. So Daniel 11 is a continuation of the vision of Daniel that began in Daniel 10. The focus in Daniel 10 was upon Christ activities within the spiritual realm, and assurances given to Daniel, who was physically and greatly affected by the events in the vision. Up to this time, the visions and dreams had given to Daniel had been in the form of symbols relating to nations and men's and behaviors, to things and unnatural beasts. The pendulum of time also swung back and forth from the future and to the far future. This chapter stands in stark contrast to the others, for the great detail provided in chapter 11 are for the near future of Israel, all the way through verse 35, that span the next several centuries following Daniel's days. So from verse 36 on to the end of the chapter, verse 45, the pendulum of time leaps forward by more than 2 millennia to the revealed Antichrist during the 7 years of tribulation. Why the change in detail relative to the previous chapters? It may be that this chapter serves as a sign that Daniel is indeed a prophet, and according to Deuteronomy 18:22, he should be listened to. All right, so here's a quick outline of this chapter. Verse 1, the angel in Daniel 10 confirms King Darius. Verse 2, the prophetic historical record of the Persian Empire. Verses 3 through 20, the prophetic and historical record of Alexander the Great. That's who's being referred to in verse 3 as the mighty king. The succeeding Grecian Empire, verses 4 through 35. The emergence of the Roman Empire, verses 18 and 19. And then the next section is verses 21 through 35. Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the little horn, according to Daniel 8, verse 30. The intervention of the Roman Empire and his reign of terror on Jerusalem. And then the next part of this outline is verses 36 through 45, which is a description of the Antichrist during the 7 years of tribulation, or the little horn in Daniel 7. All right. So let's look at the first section of this chapter. Again, I'm not going to read the chapter. It's a long read. I encourage you to read it. I encourage you to take it in. And I would also encourage you to study the histories of antiquities during that time. And you would find that a lot of these characters that are spoken of by Daniel actually lived and did exactly what this prophecy reveals. So the angel in Daniel 10 confirms King Darius. In Daniel 11:1, the very first verse provides a continuation from the previous chapter. Here the angel indicates that he provided strength and confirmation to King Darius the Mede during the first year of his rule. Again, this verse illustrates the influence of angels within our physical realm. That's one of the ways that the Lord ministered to a lot of prophets in the Old Testament, was through angels. That's the way the Lord, the Father, ministered to Jesus after his 40 days of temptation in the wilderness. And it's spoken of in Hebrews chapter 1, ministering spirits come and minister to the saints. Here's the work of this angel in confirming and strengthening Darius over his kingdom in his first year. This angel's actions demonstrate the force and will of God's sovereignty, working in the affairs of men, as has been brought out in previous chapters. Satan and his demons also have influence over those who bow to his wishes, such as the little horns in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8. So just in that one verse alone, we're reminded of the existence of heavenly spiritual beings, both to do God's will and to thwart people from doing God's will, Satan and his cronies. The next part of the outline we see is the world being under Persian rule. So Daniel 11:2 is a snapshot of the next 4 kings after Cyrus, with emphasis on the 4th. It is the 4th king who married Esther, right? So follow the timeline. It is the 4th king of these that are being prophesied in Daniel 11 verse 2 that married Esther. The importance of Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, as named in the book of Esther, is that he was the catalyst that would precipitate the actions of future kings in Greece. Through his accumulated riches, Xerxes sought to build an immense army and navy to invade and conquer Greece. Not only did he fail, but Daniel 11:2 indicates that he only managed to stir up all of Greece against him and thereby create a deep-seated anger and revenge that would one day be satisfied through the exploits of Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great is who is described in Daniel 11:3 as the mighty king. The mighty king. And so, if we look at that, Alexander the Great, in Daniel 11:13 is a description of Alexander the Great, who led the conquest against the Persian Empire as prophesied by the multi-metallic image in Daniel 2:39. Suddenly at his strength, right? At the height of his strength, Alexander would die. He died at the age of 32, I believe, after he conquered the known world. Verse 3 again says, "Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he is arisen, as soon as he reaches his peak, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of the heavens, but not to his posterity." So this is a description of Alexander the Great. His kingdom was divided among his 4 generals and not to any offspring. The verses in Daniel said they were divided to the 4 winds, but none will ever achieve the level of prosperity Alexander would achieve, according to verse 4. And as soon as he is risen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided, and yet not for his kids. So that's what we have in Daniel 11 verse 4. And then the succeeding Grecian Empire. Daniel 11:4 through 20 has a complex and detailed list of prophetic events for succeeding generations within the 4 divisions of Alexander's kingdom. It is a great exercise in comparing the history of that period of time with the passages in this section of Daniel 11. If you're able to compare the histories, find sources, find world history sources of the Grecian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, and compare how the stories of secular history line up with these prophecies. It's important to note that one harmonizes human history with the scriptures. As one harmonizes the human history with scriptures, that has always been the case that over time, we're the ones who change our story. Men. It's never the Bible that needs to be changed. It's always the history that mankind writes and revises and edits and modifies. There has never been a time that scripture had to be changed, for it is God's word and it is unchangeable. All of these events lead up to the verses that provide insight to the reign of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who is a type of the Antichrist who will appear in 7 years of tribulation. And again, so we're just going through an overview without doing verse by verse. But we're now at chapter 11, verse 18 and 19, the emergence of the Roman Empire during the time of Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Near the end of the Grecian Empire, one of the kings is shown to turn his attention towards the west, the area claimed by the Roman Empire. As Antiochus the Great presses to conquer the islands to the west, he will be stopped by the Romans and forced to return to his own land, according to Daniel 11, 18, and 19. So Antiochus, his attempt to conquer parts of the Roman Empire was turned back. And so now we're going to talk about Antiochus the Fourth, Epiphanes. In Daniel 11, 21 through 25, more detail is provided concerning Antiochus the Fourth, Epiphanes, the little horn of Daniel 8, who's been identified as Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Within that section, a comparison was made between the little horn and the Antichrist as he appears in Revelation 13 and Daniel 7. During the 7 years of tribulation, it is important to stress that unlike all Antichrists, right, because 1 John tells us about the spirit of Antichrist, who was already in the world at the time of the first century of the early church. Unlike all Antichrists who deny that Jesus is the Christ, that's the spirit of Antichrist, and deny the Father and the Son, that they are one God, it is these two Antichrists, these two who, Antiochus Epiphanes and Antichrist from Revelation 13, who also remove the sacrifices and receive the praise of men as opposed to God. The Apostle John had written about the spirit of Antichrist being present always, 1 John 2, 18 through 23. But these two, Antichrist of Revelation 13 and Daniel 7, Antiochus Epiphanes, also remove sacrifice and receive worship as God. So if you're ever wondering why does John talk about the spirit of Antichrist, it's already here. And why do some who teach end times teaching also speak of an actual Antichrist? It's based on that. The spirit of Antichrist, most people who deny Jesus is the Christ or deny that the Father and the Son are one God, they're not out there receiving worship or removing sacrifice. But these two, one in history, Antiochus Epiphanes IV, and one in the future, Antichrist, are receiving worship as God. So this section of Daniel 11 continues with detailed prophetic account of activities and characteristics of this vile person. The vile person. And we're gonna take more of a look at that right now. In the context, beginning with Daniel 10, the attributes of this man are the same as Satan himself. Listen to this. Whose angels or demons are seen battling God's messengers. Even Jesus, during his earthly ministry, accused the Pharisees of being followers of the devil, Satan, their father. Antiochus Epiphanes displayed a propensity towards lies, deceit, and desired to take God's place. He epitomized the spirit of the Antichrist. He came peaceably and then seized the kingdom by intrigue and lies and false narratives. He had no regard for the priestly office in Jerusalem and began to severely persecute the Jews. And he had a high priest, a Levitical high priest, murdered. And so this man was against any order of worship towards Yahweh, and he wanted to receive worship as God. So after his conquest began in Egypt in Daniel 11, 25 through 27, Antiochus Epiphanes IV, on his return to his home, made a stop at Jerusalem and began to severely persecute the Jews. He particularly sought out those whose heart was right with God. These individuals chose to die and suffer rather than submit to him and worship him as God. Later, he attempted to invade Egypt again, but this time Rome will have begun to exercise their own military might by sending their ships from Cyprus against him, as stated in Daniel 11, verse 30. Without achieving his aim, Antiochus Epiphanes is forced to return home. And then we're going to talk a little bit about his reign of terror on Jerusalem. In Daniel 11:30 through 35, as he retreated to his land, he again stopped along the way at Jerusalem. Enraged because of being thwarted by Rome, he again persecuted the Jews, but more severely. This time, he encouraged and sought those who were traitors and forsook the Holy Covenant. He also erected an image of his god Zeus in the temple, and he sacrificed pigs on blood. He sacrificed pig's blood on the altar. Daniel 11:30 through 32. Which is a kind of an abomination, because a pig in the time of the Old Testament was considered an unclean animal. So this guy had a high-handed rebellion towards Yahweh, and was vile and wicked. And so let's talk about Antichrist during the 7 years of tribulation, or the little horn in Daniel 7, all right? And we'll see if we could try to wrap this up. To learn more about the Apostles' description of Antichrist, or the Apostle Paul describing the Antichrist, Daniel 7, and the Apostle John's description of the Antichrist to understand Antichrist better, read Daniel 7 and Revelation 13. In Daniel 11:36 through 35, the time pendulum leaps forward from the days of Antiochus Epiphanes by more than 2 millennia to the future events during the 7 years of tribulation. This king, in the future, the Antichrist, will have such control over all human activities that he will set himself up as God, as shown in the following summary. And let me just say what that summary looks like. This is what the Antichrist looks like. He will do what he wants. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god. He will blaspheme God, Yahweh. He will prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what he has been determined shall be done. He will not regard the gods of his fathers or the desire of women. He will not regard any god. He will exalt himself above every god. The Antichrist will set himself up as God and cause all throughout the world to worship his image. Not all. I mean, he will make a covenant with many, right? But read Daniel 7:23 and 25. Read 1 Thessalonians 2:3 through 12. Read Revelation 13:5 through 8. And read Revelation 13:11 and 12. Daniel 11:39 through 43. So let's talk about those verses. These show that the Antichrist will be very powerful with the military forces he will have at his disposal. He will lavish his favors upon those whom he chooses and extend his influence over the world. Later verses show that there will be a coalition of forces from the south and north who will fight against the Antichrist, but to no avail. This is illustrated in Daniel 11. All of these countries, as well as Israel, will fall to the Antichrist. The Antichrist will conquer and loot the Egyptian riches. This is not a description of the Battle of Armageddon just yet, but one of several wars that will occur during these 7 years of tribulation. Only Edom and Moab, according to the scriptures, the area east and south of the Dead Sea, will escape from Antichrist's rule. This may be the location where God causes his people of Israel to evacuate for the last half of the tribulation. And you can look that up in Revelation 12:13 through 17. And here's I'm just going to wrap with this in Daniel 11:45. Again, you got to do some reading, got to do some studying of your own, of the book of Daniel, along with the book of Revelation. But in the last verse that we have here, in Daniel 11:45, the Antichrist hears news from the north and east about the advance of 200 million man army coming out of the land of China, which will trouble the Antichrist. Revelation 9:13 through 16. Here's where the battle lines will be drawn across the length of Israel from Armageddon through the Kidron Valley into the land of Edom, according to Revelation 16:16, Joel 3:2, Joel 3:12, Isaiah 34, 1 through 5, and Isaiah 63, verse 1. The final verse indicates that the Antichrist will establish his headquarters at the end in Jerusalem, which is between the two seas, the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. Then he will come to his end with no one to help. And we find that in Daniel 7, verse 11, as well as Revelation 19 through 20. And I'm going to read that before we close today. So both Antichrist and the false prophet will be cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. Immediately following this will be the reign of Christ and his millennial kingdom. And the question is, which are you ready for? Which do you want to be ready for? Are you hoping for the rapture, or are you ready for the tribulation? I'm not here to tell you which I think will come first. I just know that either way, we need to be ready. And so I'm going to close with these two verses, Revelation 19, and 20. Revelation 19 and 20. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth with their armies gathered to make war against him who was sitting on the horse and against his army. And the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet, who in his presence had done the signs by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped its image. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. Antichrist, the vile person, evil kings, the snake, the serpent, the devil, the false prophet, they all lose in the end. Jesus wins. I think that's the most important thing. Let's tell people that Jesus wins. Right? God bless you guys. Bye.